Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and this will be part 8 in the series in regard to Seshat, this very important goddess who is the female equivalent of Thoth, the god of astronomy, geometry, architecture, weights and measures, mathematics, astronomy, etc. So Thoth is the female, Seshat is the female counterpart of Thoth, connected to writing, record keeping, essentially science in general. Uh, she is both the daughter and the consort of Thoth, but in texts such as the pyramid text, the coffin text, and the Book of the Dead, Seshat is very important. She is the goddess of architecture, of the scribes, record keepers, astronomy, geometry, etc. So the Lady of Writing is one of the titles given to her, also connections to astronomy, to geometry, architecture, so both in the mortal world but also in the afterlife. She would be the creator of the mansions, very much connected to surveying, especially through the stretching the cord ceremony. Foremost of the builders, again, both in the living world and the afterlife, architects, builders were connected to her. Mathematics, weights and measures, just like Thoth, is a very important feature. Accountants and tax time, and this will be one of the main elements discussed in this video, the mistress of the house of the books or of record keeping and librarians. So the role of Seshat in administration and bureaucracy, the business of business and government, trade, census taking, taxation. Egypt as a civilization is, it's not very sexy, but the business of business and the business of government, administration and bureaucracy. And I'll put links in the description. I mentioned in early videos, but especially the Palermo Stone, which has these very ancient records, older surviving records in regards to the measurement systems, and for instance measuring the Nile floods, the census of the population, but also of gold and goldsmiths and cattle. So there we have a map of Egypt. Now this portion is Lake Nasser, which was created after 1970 with the High Aswan Dam. But essentially from here down along the Nile is what you have Lower and Upper Egypt. So it shifts slightly, but from Lower Egypt, so from when the Nile meets the Mediterranean, the Lower or Northern Egypt, as in Lower Egypt as in the lower part of the Nile, and the further you go along the Nile, the higher it is, or upper. So that's Upper and Lower Egypt. So Upper Egypt is actually Southern Egypt, Lower Egypt is Northern Egypt. So it can be a bit counterintuitive if you speak of it in that way. But at least as far as the official history is concerned, the Narmer palette marks the beginning of official Egyptian civilization. We'll put to the side for the moment that there was already an Upper and Lower Egypt, and he unified them, so we'll put that to the side, but at least officially that marks the beginning of official civilization, although implying two kingdoms already existed before this date is an interesting one in regards to how do you define civilization, but we'll stay to those official dates. And so there we see King Narmer with the crown of Upper or Southern Egypt. On the other side of the Narmer palette, we see King Narmer wearing the spiral crown there, or the crown of Lower Egypt or Northern Egypt. Now this is, for instance, that's Atum, where we see with the white crown, the Hedjet, which is Upper Egypt, and there we see the spiral, which is the red crown, or the Deshret, or Lower Egypt. Together they form the double crown, the Shmeti, or Upper and Lower Egypt, which even by official standards that began to 3100 BC, around about that time with King Narmer. So the length of the Nile, what we have just by following the Nile, not including the lake and the area contained by the delta, but just by the Nile itself, we're looking at about 1,000 kilometers or 600 miles in length. This is a huge area. And this is an important feature because this is a massive territory. It requires a massive and well-organized administration to govern this. This is not some little hokey region. To govern, maintain this Upper and Lower Egypt is quite a large area. It requires a very organized, very well organized administration or government bureaucracy. So Egypt is dominated by talks of the pyramids and kings. Though what of the small details? What of the small details of the lives of the average Egyptian? These are very important questions which I don't believe get enough attention in certain circles. One of my favorite mainstream Egyptologists, as they say, is Dr. Joanne Fletcher. She investigates the minutiae, the small little details of average Egyptian life. Rather than focusing on the grand kings and the grand monuments, Dr. Joanne Fletcher, and she's not isolated in this, is one of these mainstream orthodox Egyptologists. But her, along others, have dedicated their life to studying these very small details of Egyptian life. So, for instance, we have the famous Wall of the Crow, and Dr. Joanne Fletcher literally counts fish and beef bones. And by that I mean, on one side of a Wall of the Crow, you have dormitories for workers there. But also in there you have regions where there are piles, mountains of fish bones, mountains of beef bones. These small details go a long way to explaining the lives of the workers in this particular region. So on one side of the Wall of the Crow you have a sacred area. On the other side you have all the small little details of the lives of the workers, those involved in building the monuments, the tombs, whatever you want to call them. And by counting fish and beef bones, people such as Dr. Joanne Fletcher, who've dedicated their lives to these things, are actually bringing forth some very vital, it's not sexy information, but it's vital information in trying to understand how ancient Egypt operated, and these small details count very much. So questions such as how did the ancient Egyptians make their clothing? And we find these ancient instruments and these ancient small statuettes found in tombs, and these old drawings which show them in the process of making their clothes. These are small little details, but very, very important information. How did the ancient Egyptians make their rope? We find samples of their rope, but how did they do these things? One of her, amongst other specialities, is how did the ancient Egyptians make their home? And it's interesting that the finds that there are of the remnants of these mud brick homes can still be found in traditional Egyptian housing. And these are the type of small, unsexy details that people such as Dr. Joanne Fletcher investigate. So when they don't agree with certain narratives, they're quackademics. Let's dismiss them. When they say something that certain narratives like, oh, then we agree and it's a citation. This is one of the curiosities that sticks with me. But there's a lovely saying, Buddhist saying, before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. The essence of that being that small details count. And these small details are the types of things that Dr. Joanne Fletcher and her colleagues deal with. They count fish and beef bones, and they look into the small little details of ancient Egyptian life to get an idea of how things operated. These small details count. Counting fish bones and small details are really the bread and butter of serious archaeology, but they don't get the amount of coverage, and it's become a meme to say if someone's an Egyptologist, somehow they're involved in a cover-up, or they're somehow incompetent, but insert some sort of highly speculative narrative, and this is, well, acceptable. But so here's the real issue. Egypt, ancient Egypt, even if you just go by the official establishment viewpoint of King Narmer and unifying Upper and Lower Egypt, this is a massive territory. And the question is, how was such a large territory the administration, the bureaucracy involved in this? So, but then these are also important questions. What was the population of ancient Egypt? How many people were available for the great works? Temple building, for instance. What resources were available to them? What goods were being imported from neighboring regions? This is the type of thing that the air quotes, mainstream establishment Egyptologists actually deal with. So a tip of the hat to the quackademics for doing the hard and serious work and making it available, this data to people such as myself to present this information. This is the unsexy work of archaeology, which gets a bad name by, well, so, okay, I'll leave that as it is. But Upper and Lower Egypt, it's a massive territory. How was this, how did the government work? So before the sexy questions of the pyramids can be tackled, the little details must be examined. We need to chop wood and carry water in this sense. And this is what's missing from certain narratives. So what do we know about the ancient Egyptian economy? Ancient Egyptians, the market scene. The normal person had to go to they had to make an income, pay tax, go to the market, grow goods, sell goods, etc. This was essential essence of civilization. These are important questions. What do we know about the ancient Egyptian administration? How did the public service work? So whether you're doing these great works or small works, you had to organize and, well, organize the society. It was a large enterprise. How did the ancient Egyptian bureaucracy work? This has got to do especially with Seshat, with accountancy, mathematics, geometry, survey in these elements. These are all so important. So this is why Seshat and Thoth are so important. Writing, astronomy, mathematics, geometry, survey, medicine, botany, weights and measures, architecture, knowledge, science in general. You can't have a civilization, you can't have an organized society without these elements. And these are the essential questions before you get to the big ones. You need to ask the small ones. So pardon the typo there, to administer such a large territory would have required a sophisticated bureaucracy capable of taking and recording an accurate census. You need to know how many people you are governing. And this goes to the bureaucracy. So whether it's to operate effectively, Roman or any other empire, any other government needs to keep accurate records of a number of people in their territory. For instance, in the Bible story, Joseph and Mary had to go to take the census during Roman times. This was a constant throughout history. Then as now, an accurate census was essential in the running of an effective government, and ancient Egypt was no different to here in Australia or America or any other country, any other government in the world needed to know this type of information. Record keeping, one of the essential duties of Seshat. The Palermo Stone records this type, so we see there's many other aspects. I'll put links in the description where we see a taking of a census, census of the goldsmiths. They took accounts of the cattle, they took counts of all these things. So to effectively administer, govern Lower and Upper Egypt, it was vital to take a census. This then goes to accountancy. Now, accountancy is not sexy. It's not like the Great Pyramids, but without these types of elements, whoever you believe was the builder of them, they needed an effective bureaucracy to arrange however you believe that they constructed and moved these stones. What they needed was an effective government, and these small details count. So to the most wonderful people in the world, okay, the tax collectors, let's just be nice. So how was this arranged in ancient Egypt, Lower and Upper Egypt? How did they take a census? Well, we see in the Palermo Stone that this was an important business of government, and also this relates to tax collecting. And it's been a standard throughout history. Any civilization needs to be able to effectively take a census and to survey the land and to know how much wealth is within the country to organize a taxation system. You can't just pull a tax number out of the air, because your government will fall through rebellion or through bankruptcy. It's an integral aspect of a civilization to keep count of the people, to keep count of the land, and from there you can arrange taxation. And that's one of the essentials of government. Whether it's good or bad government, you need to do this accurate. And this is why Seshat is so important, the goddess of accountants, of weights and measures, of surveying, as in land, not just monuments, but in land as well. Also the goddess of mathematics, and we see that these actually come together to form this vital part of ancient Egyptian civilization. Okay, so to ponder the big questions, the small questions also need to be asked. And by those, I'll put them in the last, but we'll look at the Palermo Stone. I'll put these links in the description. They're in the last video as well. Very important, very interesting document from the Old Kingdom. And again, I'll put them in the last one. But what we have is the Palermo Stone lists important processions such as the Tour of Horus, where the king would travel up and down Lower Egypt to re-establish his authority. There'd also be census of the goldsmiths and census of the populations. Administrative, very important administrative procedures which are essential in taxation, in being able to calculate the population, to calculate how many people are available for the harvest, how many people were available for construction, and these other details. I'll also put a link in the description. We're talking about the early Egyptian economy as well. So again, it's not a very sexy topic. It's not like offering speculation in regards to the pyramid in that sense. But these small details in regards to taking of taxation, the census of the population, the census of the specialists and the tradesmen, and how many goldsmiths were available, how many stonemasons were available, how many specialist cowherds were available. Without these rather boring but very important details, so count as if Joanna Fletcher counting fish bones, counting the how much beef bones were available, for instance, at the Wall of the Crow. These boring details of the bread and butter of archaeology. Where's the picture? So what we have, Joanna Fletcher and her colleagues and these dedicated people. So for instance, the Wall of the Crow at Giza. What we have on one side of them, we have dormitories for the workers. We have corrals for the cattle to be stored. We have areas where food was prepared and fish bones have been piled up deep. Beef bones have been piled up deep. These are the small, important details where we can begin to understand. The bigger details begins with the boring details, the administration, the bureaucracy, census taking. How did they collect their tax? How did they store their taxation? Very, very important questions. And I'll put these links in there because there are many unknown grey areas, but these are the small questions which are so integral to understanding not just ancient Egypt, but also the Mesopotamia, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, ancient China, ancient India. It's these administrative details, the boring bits of accountancy. What was their currency? How did they establish their currency? What were their official weights and measures? How did they count their production abilities? How did they take account of all these small details which are, essentially ignored by some, and there are very vague areas, but there are also, even in Old Kingdom Egypt, there are so many surviving records in regards to these, which even if they don't have the explicit details in there, what they do point to is the complexity, the arrangement of these civilizations. And we see whether it's written records or visual depictions of these things. Very, very important, small, unsexy details, but details count. And that's what I think is so important. And it's easy to dismiss these. It's not sexy. Where there is a vacuum of information, it's easy to insert some rather speculative, if not sensationalist details. But even the records that do survive point to, and even just by logic alone, if you were to build one of the grand temples or the pyramids, wherever you believe it was created, however you believe it was created, it requires a sophisticated system of whatever science you choose to believe was there, whatever taxation, whatever the population. But it's in these small details. It's in this bread and butter of archaeology that so much can be extracted and understood. But it's not included in the economy, census taking, organization of society, not just the rituals, not just the ceremonies, but rather than focusing on pharaohs and kings and pyramids and grand temples, to understand these, it's essential to at least look into the boring, unsexy, unspectacular details of life, because just as with today's civilization, ancient civilization couldn't exist without organization, without maths, geometry, astronomy. These are essential aspects to them. And the wealth of information which is available about these, the mainstream quackademics who spend their whole lives studying these things and presenting vital information, when the information is complementary, then it's a citation. But when it isn't complementary, then it's quackademia, as they would say. But I would implore, I'll put some links in here, but even just the term ancient Egyptian economy, ancient Egyptian taxation, ancient Mesopotamian economy, taxation, resources, trade, these are essential aspects of ancient life, and they are no different from today. We can't get space stations up without tax, science, census taking, bureaucracy. These are not sexy topics, but they are essential topics. To begin pondering the big questions, we need to ask the small questions. And that's why at least the role of gods and goddesses such as Thoth and Seshat and the scribes, the administrators, the bureaucracy of ancient Egypt, it's not sexy, it's not spectacular, it's boring essentially, but weights and measures, these small details are the bread and butter of a civilization today. We can get space stations up there. We have a global trade network through accountancy, taxation, astronomy, weights and measures. Weights and measures has to be one of the most dry areas of research, but it is one of the bread and butter pieces of understanding how these ancient civilizations were able to work, not just in Egypt, not just in ancient India, not just in ancient Mesopotamia, but in China, all across the world, even Mesoamerica. So with small questions, once these are asked and at least pondered, then we can begin to ask the big questions. And it's through this mundane subjects, science, astronomy, geometry, arithmetic, architecture, surveying, building, mathematics, weights and measures, accountancy, librarians and record keeping. This is the core beginning of understanding into other aspects. So I can't emphasize that enough. Without the small questions, without going into the unsexy, the boring details of these aspects, you simply cannot really ask the massive questions. The pyramids are impressive. They're a great mystery, no doubt. But without the small details, without it, such as the work of Joanne Fletcher and other mainstream quackademics who are literally counting fish and beef bones and measuring stones and walls and providing all of us with this information. How did the Egyptians make their clothes, their rope, their homes? These small details count, and I can't emphasize this enough. Now, amongst certain groups, it's a meme, it's a habit to basically say this is quackademia. but I could insert alternative or pyramidions and these other terms such as, look, you want to use quackademics, this can be thrown straight back at the alternative. And I'm on the alternative side, but what I'm saying is that without these important questions, without these important details, you're really just dealing in fiction. Because when the quackademic, as they say, provides information, it's a citation. When they say something we like, we use that as a reference. When they say something we don't like, then it's ignored. For instance, Göbekli Tepe, the radiocarbon dating there, it's 12,000 years old. We accept that because we want to believe it. But when radiocarbon dating of the mortar from the Great Pyramid puts it at 2,500 BC, then it's quackademia. This is, either it's one or the other. Either we choose to accept the information we like, and we have to accept that which we don't like, or we cherry pick the information as we choose, and then it's fiction. Then it's not really, it's not coherent. We have to accept when they say something we like, we accept it. When they say something we don't like, we don't accept it. This is not adult. This is not serious work, and so we need to accept the details. We need to accept the data, and if we accept it when we like it, and we don't accept it when we don't like it, well, this is a big issue. This is small details count, and we need to accept these details. And if you choose to cherry pick, it's not scholarly. It's not authentic. It's not adult. And there are these small details that count, and we need to either accept or deny. We accept everything, or we sort of deny everything. But for radiocarbon dating, if it works when we like it, then we must accept it when it works when we don't like it. And this is a point. This is an important point. But also the small questions, the unsexy questions of accountancy, bureaucracy, government, population counts, record keeping. These are all very, very, very important things. So several links will be in a description. By no means accept everything just because it's on the alternative, or don't by no means accept everything because it's on the alternative. And what you will find is on the establishment archaeology, which is usually just defined by Mark Lehner and Zoe House, you'll find that there is actually quite a span, it's not a monolith. There are many varying views across the scale, and these are often misrepresented by the alternative to say that ancient history is this one great monolith which believes in a slow, gentle curve of development of technology. This is simply untrue. There have been multiple rises and collapses in civilization and technology. This is what actually the mainstream says about, and it's become a meme. It's become cool just to basically throw poo-poo on the official mainstream archaeologists who are actually doing the work to provide us with this information. And when it's complementary, it's acceptable. When it isn't, it's quackademia. I won't buy into this cult, and that's what I believe. It's become almost cultish in an essence. You need to take the good with the bad. You need to look at the small details, and to ignore the small details in favor of when it's nice, okay? Well, then you must accept them when it's not nice as well. That's the way of the world. That's adulthood. And there are small details count. We need to look into them. We need to accept the details when they don't count. Otherwise, we can't accept them when they do complement what we choose to believe. Chop wood and carry water. Small details count. With that, I hope you enjoyed, and have a good one.